Welcome to Game Theorem, where we have serious discussions about absurd entertainment.
Now, normally we'd start off one of these deep dive episodes with a quote, but we need to hold off on that and actually introduce our subject matter first, because this is going to be an intensely spoilery episode.
Oh, yes. Yeah, spoilers for Madoka Magica and side stories and side series and the movie and all of that.
Right, so we're talking about an anime, because of course we were going to finish off with an anime, right? Mm-hmm. And it's an anime called, Puella Madoka Magica, I think is the full name.
Yeah.
It's a mix of Latin and Japanese. Mm-hmm. Puella meaning girl, Magi, magical girl. Okay. It's an amazing subversion of the magical girl genre of anime. Mm-hmm.
Which I guess originally started with shows like Sailor Moon.
Yes, yeah, girls, magic, dresses, pink, pretty, all that kind of aesthetic, princesses, that kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. This show is amazing at subverting that because it is not that.
Yeah.
So, Puella Madoka Magica, content warnings for death, substance abuse, domestic violence, torture, capitalism, exploitation, carnivorism, genocide.
Are you done yet? You done?
Did I mention capitalism?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really cool. Definitely recommend giving it a watch if you haven't yet. The show looks like it's one thing early on, but then partway through, just when you're where's the show going? You realize it's something very different. Mm-hmm. Also, the art style of the nemesis of the show is extremely interesting. Like, literally, it's surrealist art.
It's really amazing.
Yeah, and it has like like Danganronpa, the execution music. It has that same type of like unsettling tone to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It's really hard to liken it to anything other than something like Danganronpa's executions because it's that sort of... it's hard to pin down the vibe correctly.
I think they were both kind of pulling from the same place.
Yeah.
Right? I think part of it has to do with a mixing of genres, like pop, but also something with like flute instruments. I'm not sure, or not flute, like drum instruments. Anyway, we're gonna start talking about the show now. Huge spoiler warnings for everything because we can't even talk about the beginning of the chronological timeline without giving spoilers away.
Yep.
But this is also a really a really interesting show to dissect and talk about chronologically because of its time shenanigans.
Yep.
So the quote is, "On this planet, you call females who have yet to become adults girls. It makes sense then that since you'll eventually become witches, you should be called magical girls. Cube, the incubator."
You have no idea how sinister that is yet.
It's so amazing showing people here's the screenshot of what the main antagonist from this show is.
It's a cute little...
it's like a magical alien kitten.
Yeah.
And there's memes. I don't remember where I saw it. There was a meme sometime I saw where people were just like, why does everyone get mad when I post this picture of this cute little alien anime kitty? Because they'll post that picture and be like, look how cute. And then Madoka Magica fans will be like, bleep you.
Yeah.
All right, so this is going to be broken down in timelines. Oh, by the way, there's no chance that we're going to finish this episode in one. So we're going to split it in two and have an extra revisit. It's just how we have to do it. We don't want to rush it.
Mm-hmm. I will say that I think Cube is one of the most universally hated characters in a fandom, other than maybe Umbridge in the Harry Potter series.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right. The problem is I mean, forgive me, Madoka Magica fans, but there is a huge segment of the Madoka Magica fandom that really doesn't understand the point of the show.
Yeah.
They don't understand why Kyubey is evil, because Kyubey's entire existence is a metaphor for people that exist in the real world.
Yeah.
And since they don't turn their ire on those people, it makes me feel like they didn't understand what the show was actually saying. So let's explain that.
Yep.
So first we have what I call the primordial timeline. You'll notice I did a lot of research going into this. Kira helped me out.
Yeah.
And we have significantly more timelines than you'll find on most wikis. Because like I said, a lot of the fans, and a lot of these fans edit the wikis, don't really understand what the point of the show is. And while there is some editorializing here, I mean, we've never been ashamed of that. You cannot talk about this show without talking about politics.
Yeah.
To do so is literally a disservice and means that you miss the point of the show.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
It's like talking about the history of America without talking politics. You just can't do it.
Yeah.
Not accurately, anyway. Mm-hmm. So, the primordial timeline. There existed a cosmic alien civilization that was so technologically advanced that it could easily perform feats that were indistinguishable from magic by what they considered to be lesser forms of life. The workings of their society, as well as their very physicality, was unknown to all outside societies that failed to match their technological superiority.
These aliens considered themselves to be the most logical beings ever, and they would claim it was their steadfast adherence to logic, science, and their societal systems that ensured they became the most advanced civilization in the universe. In their society, emotions were considered deviant, foreign phenomena endemic to less advanced civilizations.
Yeah, a really interesting thing is to go back and watch the show once you already know a lot of the twists, right? Mm-hmm. Because Kyubey, the main antagonist, will tell you, like, oh, they just don't have emotions. But he's lying?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Like, clearly?
Yeah. And you find that out for sure later on.
I mean, sure, he's like a detached kind of sociopath type of character, but he would have you believe that they just biologically don't have emotions, and that's not quite true. Mm-hmm. Because, as it goes on, however, emotions did arise among some members of their society in ways that could not simply be ignored, and the response was to internally label these beings as mentally ill and deficient for experiencing emotions. The majority of the aliens considered the emotional members of their society to be an anomaly and marginalized them.
Yeah. And we see an example of this in the show, so yeah.
Oh yeah, that is true. But yes,
I forget what that was.
There's basically one Kyubey in one of the spin-off comics or manga that does get like emotions.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But the point is that it's basically like ableism.
Mm-hmm. The advanced technology and sheer size of their massive civilization required the consumption of an astronomical amount of energy, and many resources were employed to make energy extraction as efficient as possible.
It was known to these aliens that the second law of thermodynamics and the inevitable heat death of the universe would mean that their civilization was doomed to eventually end in the far future if they failed to find a way to produce more energy than they invested in its production.
In their effort to maximize energy extraction, these aliens scoured the universe to try to find other methods of acquiring energy. In their efforts, they identified a law of balance, the term they gave to describe how their intervention to create energy would inevitably bring about destruction in another part of the universe. They sought to break this law.
These aliens eventually discovered Earth, and they found that the dominant species on the planet, humans, were capable of producing emotional energy that could be harvested. They studied the humans and found that young girls during adolescence had the greatest emotional potential, enough to break the law of balance, tipping in the favor of producing more energy than was invested. So this is kind of like a science fantasy sort of show kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Over years and years, these aliens built up and developed a system of energy extraction from these young girls. The project began with an acknowledgement of human sentience and an attempt at fairness that took the form of consensual contracts, so that any human chosen for energy extraction would have the opportunity to decline being directly a part of the process.
Right. And again, this entire system is just capitalism. It's just an alien accentuated form of capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
Beings called incubators were bioengineered and mass-produced to function as the intermediary in the relationship between humanity and the alien civilization, where they would represent the interests of the aliens. Like, literally, we never see a single one of the aliens.
Mm-hmm.
They were designed to appear to be cute, mythical beings to appeal to young girls. They were normally invisible to humans, but they could make themselves known to prospective young girls and communicate with them telepathically.
Incubators all shared a hive mind and interconnected consciousness, but existed within numerous bodies shared throughout the world. They were tasked with brokering contracts, advising those that accepted, harvesting emotional energy, and disposing of alien waste products, like incubator corpses.
The incubators would make pitches to young girls around the age of 14. While many girls would be slightly older or younger than 14 at the time of the pitch, 14 was the desired age for maximum harvest potential.
Mm-hmm.
So they're really going for, like, honestly, Madoka Magica is one of the only shows that I know of that, like, is about children and wouldn't really work if it was about things other than children. Like,
yeah.
Like, a lot of times I think shows that focus on children, it's like, you could have just done adults and have it be less controversial. Mm-hmm. No, this show is about kids. It's about the exploitation of children.
Yep.
We should give a bit of a warning, though. I forgot about this. We're going to cover some of the spin-off mangas in this series.
Oh, right, yeah.
But the thing is, the original anime was so massively successful and was so amazing that Madoka Magica kind of became like an IP, capital I, capital P. Mm-hmm. And capitalism in the real world basically meant that they started like milking it for money every time they could get.
Yeah.
So a lot of the characters that are introduced in these spin-off manga, well, first of all, the spin-off manga can't ever risk affecting the main show, so rarely are they allowed to tell an interesting story.
Mm-hmm.
But also, the new characters that are added are progressively more and more sexualized, even though this is about kids.
Yeah.
And it's really gross and really offensive.
And it's very obvious that they're being sexualized.
Yes, especially when the main characters in the main show were never done that way.
Yeah, exactly.
So, or at least it was almost negligible.
Mm-hmm.
Much less than what you would expect from most anime.
Yeah.
So we're going to give those spin-off manga the respect they deserve and cover them in about a paragraph each. We're not going to go into detail.
Mm-hmm.
So understand that.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's keep going.
Whenever a young girl accepted the verbal contract, their consciousness, often called a soul, would be extracted from their body and placed into a seemingly magical artifact called a soul gem. The soul gem required emotional energy to sustain itself and stave off corrupting influences like despair, but it was capable of animating the body from a distance within several dozen meters and numbing any sensations of pain that the body might feel. It was advised that the girls keep their soul gems on their bodies at all times, and they would become known as magical girls.
Whenever the soul gem of a magical girl became too corrupted to sustain itself, it would implode, reforging itself as an object called a grief seed, all as the soul fell into bottomless despair, thereby releasing a massive wave of energy that would be collected by nearby incubators. The grief seed would lose connection with their human body, and it would eventually hatch, with the magical girl having transformed into a witch, a magical being capable of bending reality on their basest emotions and despair.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like a huge twist that the witches the girls fight are the end result of magical girls.
Yeah.
It's, again, a system that pits them against each other.
Mm-hmm. A requirement of magical girls in their contracts was that they would fight witches to prevent them from causing too much destruction or suffering. Magical girls were granted powers and abilities that assisted their contractual obligation to incessantly fight witches, which were invisible to anyone that wasn't a direct participant in this system.
At least in the proper world.
Mm-hmm.
In return for their participation in the energy extraction, magical girls were granted one thing in exchange for their indefinite service. The incubators would offer to grant each of the young girls a single wish for anything they wanted. They claimed that this was a fair bargain.
Wishes were granted using the initial burst of emotional energy in the creation of a soul gem, but not all wishes were equal. A wish could only be granted if enough emotional energy was imbued into it, but all wishes would still be granted anyway. This was not because the theoretical size of a wish was inherently reliant upon the magical potential of any given girl, but rather the theoretical size of a wish and the magical potential of any given girl were reliably correlated. The bigger the wish, the bigger the heart, the bigger the magical potential.
Yeah, that's a good way to summarize it.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions?
No.
The specific nature of a given wish would determine the powers, abilities, and aesthetics that the magical girl would receive. Magical girls would all fight witches, and upon defeating them, the witches would revert back into grief seeds. If left alone, they could eventually rehatch, but the magical energy within them could also be used to siphon the corrupting influences out of a soul gem, thereby sustaining it. Magical girls were thus incentivized to continually fight witches to prevent their own corruption. In doing so, they often marked various regions as their turf or hunting grounds, though teaming up was not uncommon.
Mm-hmm. Once a grief seed had been used
Again, we're talking about, like, competition within capitalism.
Yeah. The grief seeds are a resource to keep the magical girls going.
No, the grief seeds are your paycheck.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
And, yeah, you're right.
I mean, and the whole system is like, but we're just girls fighting girls that turn into witches. Like, what's even the point of this? You could just stop the conflict altogether by not making magical girls. And then Kyubei's like, but then we don't get to skim the profit off the top.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Once a grief seed had been used to restore a soul gem, it was imperative to dispose of it to prevent a witch from hatching from the enriched grief seed. Incubators would take those enriched grief seeds as a secondary method of energy acquisition via a hatch above their rear ends.
Remember that. That's very important. When a grief seed approached the moment of its hatching, it would create a magical spatial distortion called a labyrinth. The labyrinth would be populated with dreamlike artifacts based on the despair-ridden psyche of the witch, often concerning the nature of the wish she had once made. Upon hatching, the pseudo-physical form of the witch would be represented in the surreal manner as well. Like, honestly, one of the best things about the Madoka Magica fandom are the analyses of the witches. Mm-hmm. Like, there's videos and stuff of, like, people, like, just, like, looking at the labyrinth and be like, oh, okay, this means that they must have this, and this means they must have this. And it's really interesting how much you can learn about each individual witch based on these analyses. Mm-hmm. The unfortunate thing is, it's not very concrete. A lot of it is kind of guesswork, but it's analytical guesswork, and it's just really interesting.
Yep. People in the vicinity of a labyrinth could be unconsciously manipulated by its corrupting influence, and they would act in ways detrimental to themselves and others at the behest of the witch, which could include acts of suicide, murder, sabotage, cult formation, or just leading them into the labyrinth where they'd most likely be lost forever. Witches increase in their magical potential with every person they consumed.
Because they're consuming the person and their emotions and everything. Adding to their own, right? Mm-hmm. Witches could splice their own souls to create semi-conscious entities that existed within their labyrinths, as well as pet familiars that were capable of leaving and forming their own labyrinths. If familiars consumed enough people, they could eventually transform into witches, effectively duplicating what remained of the soul of the original witch.
Despite the supposed fairness of the system of energy extraction, the contract was mostly enforced out of duty towards the law of balance, the formation of witches were considered the counterbalance that resulted from the aliens' interference via their granting of wishes. And since the formation of witches were vital to the breaking of that law and the extraction of excess energy, the wish granting was a necessary formality.
Right, which implies that they're not, like, again, these things claim to not have emotions, right? Mm-hmm. Their granting of wishes isn't to be kind, nor is it to be fair. Why would they care about fairness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their granting of wishes they only do because they believe it to be necessary for the system to even work.
Yep.
In addition, incubators on behalf of the aliens were incentivized to undersell the less appealing aspects of becoming magical girls. They would expand in great detail. They would expound in great detail about how wonderful having the powers and duties of a magical girl would be, and about how amazing a wish could be. But they would never mention how witches were formed, how incubators worked, nor the eventual fates of magical girls to prospective targets.
Furthermore, incubators would prey on young girls in unhealthy, dangerous, and even life-threatening situations, often encouraging them to partake in the system or face oblivion. Incubators even started introducing themselves by their nickname, Cubey, and magical girls would come to respect and admire Cubey as a guide.
Cubey, incubator, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, this is, again, very apt to the analogy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, you can get another job, or die if you fail.
Yep.
That kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cubey would only tell the magical girls the full nature of their exploitation if directly questioned about it, which usually only happened if a magical girl discovered the unfavorable aspects of their contract during the course of her duty. Even then, Cubey frequently lied or misrepresented the truth, with every word being told through the lens of increased energy extraction.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like going to your HR department.
Through the millennia, humans advanced technologically and developed their own societies, with many political decisions being made through wishes that magical girls sacrificed themselves to make. Cubey took credit for all of this advancement, falsely assuming that humanity's advancement would not have happened without the aliens' interference.
Which, again, is just like how capitalists try to claim that all this technology, like, oh, you hate capitalism, but you have an iPhone? It's like, you think that any other system couldn't make something much better than the iPhone? Get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, great. We have to talk about this. This is from one of the spin-off comics.
Mm-hmm.
For the record, the whole idea that there's been, like, magical girls throughout history is interesting. Right?
Yeah.
Especially considering how awful a job it is and sacrificial it is. So it kind of implies that most of human history is actually thanks to women.
Yeah.
And men just kind of took credit for it because the women would eventually die due to their sacrifice. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of like, maybe not a metaphor and just true.
Yeah.
Anyway, in the 15th century, Tarte was a magical girl that wished to have the power to bring light to France. In her adventures and exploits, she eventually became known as Joan of Arc and was christened a saint by the Catholic Church.
Yeah, Joan of Arc was a magical girl.
I don't like it when they actually name specific people, though. I'm like, come on, let's not like fan fiction history.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, I guess you can fan fiction history, but there's a higher expectation of doing it well. Okay, that's all I'm saying.
In the 21st century, magical girls continued to be a thing. One team of magical girls was the Pleiades Saints?
The Pleiades.
The Pleiades Saints in Asunaro City in Japan, which included Kazumi Subaru and her friends. They got into many adventures fighting witches, and even managed to disconnect one Cubey from his hive mind. They taught this one how to express emotions, and nicknamed him Jubei.
Yeah, again, that's another one of the spin-offs.
Yeah.
Kazumi's ridiculously sexualized. It's
Yeah.
this whole comic is kind of like, why? Like, it doesn't go anywhere. Like, I understand there's a certain appeal in just learning about the characters, right? You don't have to have good plot for a good story. Mm-hmm. But it helps.
Yeah, it does. And also maybe make them actually interesting characters.
Yeah.
Because, like, the main story is entirely driven by the characters.
Like, let's also be real. One of the things anime is really strong with is good character design. Mm-hmm. And this just feels weak to me.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Meanwhile, in Hozuki City, Suzune Amano was a magical girl who learned the truth of magical girls and decided she would become an assassin, killing other magical girls by night to prevent them from turning into witches. Some other magical girls teamed up to stop her, and when they convinced her that what she was doing was wrong, she killed herself.
Yeah. We did say suicide.
We did?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I mean, it's definitely a more interesting take on the whole emotional situation. I don't think that one's as bad, but I don't know about ending a story with suicide. That's dark.
Yeah. Meanwhile, in Kamihama City, 4 girls, Ui Tamaki, Alina Gray, Toka Satomi, and Nemu Hiragi, made coordinated wishes as magical girls to create an independence movement for magical girls called the Wings of the Magius, establishing a barrier called the Wings of the Magius, establishing a barrier around the city. Any magical girls within the barrier would become a doppel temporarily instead of a witch, with the goal of saving magical girls and the eventual goal of rebelling against Kyubei's system. However, a side effect of it was that Ui was erased from everyone's memory due to her wish.
Yes, we'll talk more about this one later, but that's basically the setup for one of the side stories that happens later. So yeah, we'll talk about that later, but just keep in mind that there's basically this like independence movement that's trying to get away from Kyubei, which I think could have been an interesting setup for a story, to be fair. Mm-hmm. You know, like I'm imagining like the Zapatistas or something, you know?
Yeah.
Nagisa Momoe was one of the younger but more powerful magical girls, having only been contracted around the age of 9. However, her short life had become inundated with disease and pharmaceuticals. I think specifically, like there's a little bit of information on her past about her, like her mother being sick or whatnot.
Okay.
But she eventually corrupted, and while passing through Mitakihara City, transformed into a powerful witch known as Charlotte, the Desert Witch.
Yep.
Oh yeah, another thing that's interesting. The names of the witches isn't something you actually can know in the show.
Yeah, because they use like, this weird... They do put up the names when they meet the witch.
But it's like in this eldritch language, but there's an alphabet cipher you can use to figure out what they really are.
Yep. Mami Tomoe was a young girl who was fatally wounded in a car crash. Kyubei took advantage of her desperate situation to offer her a contract. With little time to think, she wished to protect herself and be able to live. Her body was mended as she was made into a magical girl, and she was granted an upper-middle-class apartment with enough amenities to live a comfortable life.
I like that detail, to be honest. That's often kind of overlooked. She's one of the only main cast to actually have, like, her own place.
Yeah, and it's because she's an orphan.
Well, a lot of magical girls are orphans, to be fair.
Yeah.
But she's been this way for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Mommy's desperate situation resulted in her not having the time to contemplate her decision, and so it never occurred to her to ask about the more pernicious details of her contract. Therefore, she had a friendly relationship with Kyubei, and she quickly became a veteran magical girl. Her aesthetic was based around survival, and she used magical guns and ribbons for weaponry. She established her turf around Mitakihara City, and she distinguished herself from other magical girls by going out of her way to defeat familiars before they turn into witches, putting in many overtime hours in her duties to save more innocent lives.
Mm-hmm.
So, is it okay if we keep talking about the metaphor? I don't want to like harp on the capitalism bit too much, but there's just so much there.
Yeah, okay.
Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
I see Mommy as like the quintessential, like, good, hardworking capitalist businesswoman, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's the one that's like putting in the overtime hours because she really believes that what she's doing is helping the world.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, like, kind of, like, she is saving people, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what about the day she becomes a witch? You
know?
What about the hidden dark side cost to the work she's doing?
Mm-hmm.
Which I relate to very much in my day job.
Yeah. Kyoko Sakura was a young daughter of a preacher in Kazumino City. Her father felt that there was truth in their religion, but he felt it was antiquated and not up to date with modern people's lives. He began preaching his more accepting interpretation of his religion's teachings, and his whole family received great backlash from the greater religious community. He lost his job, and Kyoko's entire family became extremely poor, having to scavenge food to survive.
Kyubei approached Kyoko with an offer, and she wished to make everyone listen seriously to what her dad says. Her father was readmitted as a well-respected member of the community, and his family was no longer poor. However, when he discovered that his followers only believed his teachings because of Kyoko's wish, he disowned her, thinking of her as a lying witch. He became an alcoholic and then murdered his entire family, except for Kyoko.
Mm-hmm.
Because, let's be real, he wouldn't have been able to take her in a fight.
Yeah. Kyoko refocused herself on her magical girl duties and on survival. Her aesthetic was based around religion, and she used magical spears and chains for weaponry, along with illusion magic. She established her turf around Kazumino City, as the neighboring cities were already claimed by other magical girls.
Junko Kaname was a successful corporate worker in Mitakihara City who spent most of her time at business meetings ingratiating high-ranking executives. Her work supported her family, including her husband, Tomohisa Kaname, her daughter, Madoka Kaname. How do you say her name again?
Madoka.
Madoka. Okay, sorry. I might have missed that a few times. Madoka Kaname and her baby boy, Tatsuya Kaname.
Madoka accidentally ran into Mommy while she was doing her duties as a magical girl, and Madoka became enamored with the idea of helping people as a magical girl. Mommy, being the naive veteran who thought of her duty as seriously dangerous but morally ethical, showed her what being a magical girl was like. Kyubei approached Madoka with an offer, and she wished to be a magical girl. Her aesthetic was based around love, and she used magical bows and arrows for weaponry. She and Mommy became a team, and Mommy was ecstatic to not be alone anymore due to turf trauma. However, Madoka's wish was almost non-existent, and as such, she was a pretty weak and novice magical girl.
Yeah, she literally basically didn't work. This is effectively, Madoka is the unpaid intern. Mm-hmm. She's just I want to work there so badly. I just want to be a magical girl. Mm-hmm. And literally doesn't wish for anything in return.
Yeah.
Homura Akemi was a young, bedridden girl who was recovering from a heart disease. When she recovered, she transferred to Mitakihara Middle School and had difficulty making friends. Madoka reached out to her and became friends with her, and eventually, Homura discovered that Madoka was a magical girl when they saved her from Isabel the Artist Witch. Madoka and Mommy defeated several witches, including Solieka the Dark Witch's familiar Ola, Gertrude the Rose Garden Witch, Kirsten the Box Witch, Charlotte the Desert Witch, and Elsa Maria the Shadow Witch, with Homura standing by as a supportive friend.
Mommy, Madoka, and Homura eventually discovered what became of magical girls upon their corruption, and they were shaken by this realization. Mommy and Madoka then regretted becoming magical girls. Kyubei approached Homura with an offer, and she wished to go back in time to stop them from becoming magical girls.
So next we have the Walpurgisnacht timeline. Mm-hmm. Now this is going to be a little controversial because famously the anime doesn't tell you where Walpurgisnacht came from, but it's kind of thematically obvious if you think about it. Mm-hmm. Walpurgisnacht is a witch that has the same type of powers that Homura does. And they have a quintessential conflict between the two characters. And they are also both much more powerful than the other characters by the time that we get to that point in the show. Mm-hmm. So it's very implied to have been her, even though we don't really know. And the fact that Homura doesn't become that in other timelines doesn't really change that. We've seen characters turn into different things in different timelines.
Yeah.
Homura was sent back in time to before Mommy had become a magical girl, but now Homura was a magical girl. Her aesthetic was based around time, and she used a magical shield for weaponry with the ability to stop time around her.
Homura tried to intervene with the decisions of her friends to become magical girls, first starting with Mommy and then Madoka. However, each time she failed and ended up losing a friend, Homura became overwhelmed with despair and corrupted into a witch.
The witch had strange time powers just like Homura had, and it used them to prey upon magical girls and other witches alike, which is unusual, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
It ended up merging with several other witches and absorbing their powers, eventually becoming Walpurgisnacht, the stage-constructing witch. She neglected using labyrinths and instead began hopping to different points in time, devastating entire cities in dramatic fanfare.
Mm-hmm.
For the record, Walpurgisnacht is the only merged witch.
Yeah.
So, most likely Homura was one of the witches that eventually became Walpurgisnacht.
Yeah.
So next we have to do Homura's first timeline.
Oh yeah, this is the original one.
Yeah, this one is basically what people think of as the original timeline. It's the one that Walpurgisnacht just pops into.
Yep. Walpurgisnacht became infamous in history among magical girls and witches for her random and unstoppable destruction. However, as the years went by, knowledge of her faded away to little more than rumor.
Mommy and Madoka became magical girls just like they had originally, with all of their same wishes and contracts, none the wiser that this had all happened before. Homura had never become a magical girl in this timeline, and she remained a supportive observer. Because Walpurgisnacht went further back in time, making the timeline diverge earlier.
Yep. However, one day, Walpurgisnacht mysteriously appeared above Mintakahara City to destroy yet another city. Walpurgisnacht was the strongest witch they had ever fought, immediately killing thousands of people. Mommy tried to stop her, but she was killed in battle. Madoka kept fighting anyway, until eventually she was struck down. Homura watched Madoka slowly die from blood loss in front of her, and Madoka expressed her regret for becoming a magical girl. When Madoka died, Homura cried over her body, only now realizing that she had fallen in love with her. That's when Kyubei approached Homura with an offer, and she wished to go back in time to protect Madoka.
And that's Homura's wish. For real this time, her thing is to protect Madoka.
Mm-hmm.
Because she loves her. And honestly, it feels really genuine. I'm not usually one for shipping, young children and shows and whatnot. But they spend so long building this up. The position these girls are in, being, exploited and whatnot, they have to mature, mentally and emotionally, to be able to survive this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And all they had was each other.
Mm-hmm.
Homura's second timeline. Homura was sent back in time to before Madoka had become a magical girl, right after she had recovered from her heart disease. But now Homura was a magical girl. Her aesthetic was based around time, mostly like before, but now she could also jump back in time, back to this point in this body as much as possible. So it's when she jumps in time, she transfers consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Homura approached Madoka shortly after Madoka became a magical girl, telling her that she too was a magical girl. Mommy and Madoka were doubtful of her claims at first, but when Homura demonstrated her abilities, they knew she must have been telling the truth. Homura asked them to train her to be a powerful magical girl so that she could protect Madoka.
I like how in the first repeat timeline, she just goes up and just tells them everything, tries to tell them the truth. And they're doubtful, but it works, right?
Mm-hmm.
Homura's magical abilities were useful, but she lacked any offensive weaponry. So Mommy told her to find some more mundane weaponry to use in conjunction with her abilities. Homura went online and researched how to build bombs, and she practiced building them to use in her fights.
Yeah, so you have this little teenage girl, building pipe bombs.
It's kind of funny.
Yeah. When Mommy, Madoka, and Homura fought Patricia the class representative witch, Homura managed to defeat the witch by pausing time and throwing a strategic pipe bomb at her. The three of them continued as a team, training and fighting witches to eventually prepare for their arrival of Walpurgisnacht.
When Valpurgisnacht appeared, the three of them fought hard. Mommy was killed in battle just as before, but Madoka was fatally wounded and fell into despair. Madoka corrupted and transformed into a moderately powerful witch.
Homura, shocked at the revelation that magical girls eventually became witches, went back in time to try again.
Homura's third timeline. We might be starting to see a pattern here. This isn't good. Homura went back in time to before Madoka had become a magical girl, right after she had recovered from her heart disease. Homura isolated herself for a while as she dealt with the traumatic experience, not sure what to do. I mean, because keep in mind, it's not just like, oh, this big bad thing killed us all and like restarted time. She already went through that, right? Mm-hmm. It's that they tried it a completely different way and she has to go through it again, right?
Yeah.
Like imagine like, you know, you're working on something on your computer, it crashes on you, you're like, oh crap, I have to do it again. That's demoralizing, right?
Yeah.
But you pick up the gumption, you do it again, and imagine it crashes again.
Yeah.
How worse is that?
Yeah. Madoka became a magical girl and teamed up with Mommy just as before. With Homura not in their lives, Madoka spent more time with her other friends at school.
Madoka had two other friends at school, Sayaka Miki and Hitomi Shizuki. Sayaka had an enormous crush on Kyosuke Kamijo, a violinist prodigy who had lost the use of his hand in an unfortunate accident. She visited him at the hospital regularly and often tried to cheer him up, but he was extremely depressed from losing his talent. Hitomi, meanwhile, came from a rich family like Kyosuke, and she had fallen for him as well, but she kept that a secret to let Sayaka court him. Mm-hmm. So these characters do appear in the other timelines, they just never get involved with the whole magical girl and witch stuff.
Yeah.
They do this time because Homura isolates herself.
Yep. When Hitomi was attacked by Kirsten the Box Witch, Kyubei approached Sayaka, who had learned about magical girls by hanging out with Madoka, with an offer, and Sayaka wished to heal Kyosuke's injuries. Kyosuke's injuries were immediately healed, and he began rehabilitation with the goal of eventually playing the violin again. Sayaka's aesthetic was based around health, and she used magical swords for weaponry, with the ability to heal herself when wounded. She used her abilities to kill Kirsten and save Hitomi.
Mami, Madoka, and Sayaka worked together as a team to kill Charlotte the Desert Witch.
Homura eventually worked up the courage to confront Mommy, Madoka, and Sayaka, telling them that she too was a magical girl and about how all witches were corrupted magical girls. None of them were willing to accept that, especially considering Homura's sudden appearance, none more so than Sayaka. Sayaka suspected that Homura was trying to cause drama in the team, specifically claiming that Homura throwing bombs would conflict with Sayaka's meleeing with swords.
Right, so here we see that like the actions Homura does or doesn't take really affects the timeline and all of the ways besides what's important, saving Madoka, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's because that's what Homura's after.
Mm-hmm.
And Homura realizes like, oh, this time there's a new magical girl with them, Sayaka, someone that she doesn't know, right?
Yeah.
And Sayaka doesn't trust her. So not only does she have this really unpalatable information of we turn into witches, right?
Yeah.
There's also someone else there that's not on her side.
Yeah.
So they don't take the information very well. Not only that, like their attacks don't really mesh well together, and Sayaka takes that kind of personally. Mm-hmm. So in order to be allowed to rejoin her team, Homura used her ability to stop time to sneak into places and steal non-explosive weapons without being seen. At first, sneaking into Yakuza safe houses and stealing their guns and bullets. Mm-hmm. It's really funny to see her going into this place with time stopped and she like pulls out like an Uzi and...
Yeah. Homura joined the team and tried to warn them repeatedly about what she knew of the future, but no one believed her about becoming witches, especially Sayaka. However, they took her warning about Valpurgisnacht more seriously, and Sayaka reached out to the neighboring city of Kazumino City to recruit Kyoko to their team to bolster their forces. Kyoko was hesitant to work with the team, but she and Sayaka eventually became especially close good friends.
Yeah, they have like this whole like rivalry, romance kind of thing. For a short time, all 5 magical girls fought witches together, like Elsa Maria the Shadow Witch.
However, Sayaka's soul gem began to corrupt as she realized Kyosuke was drifting away from her. Hitomi gave her an ultimatum to admit her feelings for him, or else she would ask him out. Sayaka, realizing her job was very dangerous, refused to ask him out, thinking of herself as no longer human. When Hitomi and Kyosuke started dating, she sunk into despair and eventually corrupted into Octavia von Seckendorf, the Mermaid Witch.
Oh yeah, that was really sad. This is obviously a previous timeline version of it than what you see in the show, but when Sayaka corrupts for the first time that you see, it's so sad. Because, basically she threw away her life, her wish, on someone else to get better, hoping, they'd get together, and they didn't. And she's just so sad.
Yeah.
The rest of them learned that Homura had been telling the truth all along, and they worked together to kill her, with Homura finishing her off. Mommy, refusing to believe that her entire career as a magical girl had perpetuated such evil, had a mental breakdown, and used one of her magical guns to shoot Kyoko's soul gem, killing her. She claimed that they all needed to die to not become witches. She tried to kill Homura next, but Madoka killed Mommy to save Homura. So this is the thing about Mommy. I love Mommy as a character, right? She's amazing.
But she never takes the news of magical girls becoming witches well.
Again,
in any timeline when she finds this out.
Right. Think of her as the hardworking capitalist who finds out the incontrovertible truth that her lifetime's work has been making the world a worse place.
Yeah.
And she just snaps.
Yep.
And it's really awful.
Yeah. Madoka and Homura cried over their loss, but they decided to continue living for each other. They promised each other that they could defeat Valpurgisnacht together.
However, when Valpurgisnacht eventually appeared, the two of them were brutally defeated by her. They laid upon the broken ground, both of them full of despair. Homura wanted them to be together as witches, but Madoka purified Homura's soul gem with her last grief seed. Madoka begged Homura to go back in time and prevent her from becoming a magical girl, and to prevent her from becoming a witch.
Homura pulled out her gun and mercy killed Madoka before she could turn into a witch, and then she went back in time to try again.
One of the really interesting things is the way that scene is shot is that it's actually ambiguous whether when she pulled out the gun, she shot Madoka in the head or in the soul gem. She probably shot her in the soul gem, let's be real. But it's framed in such a way that it looks like the more real-world, brutal variation of that.
Yeah.
Homura's fourth timeline. Homura went back in time to right before Madoka had become a magical girl, right after she had recovered from her heart disease.
Homura hardened her heart and immediately sought to prevent Madoka from making a contract with Kyubey. She found a Kyubey stalking Madoka's home and she killed him. She then warned Madoka to not trust Kyubey if another one ever approached her. Homura decided that the best course of action would be to fight Valpurgisnacht alone, so that no one else would have to become magical girls, witches, or end up dead. She made sure Kyubey never made contact with Madoka, so that she would never accept a contract.
Since Madoka didn't meet Kyubey, Madoka also never met Mommy. She continued her normal school life with Hitomi and Sayaka, who also didn't become a magical girl.
Mommy continued to fight witches by herself, but she became incredibly lonely. Homura interacted briefly with the witch, who escaped to Kazumino City and fought Kyoko. It then escaped her and came back, and Kyoko tracked it down. However, it ambushed her and killed her. Then, when Mommy faced Charlotte the Desert Witch, she was overwhelmed, fighting her by herself, and the witch devoured her.
Yeah, that sounds a bit complicated, but the whole point is basically for some reason in this timeline, Kyoko did come to the city, but just still died anyway. Homura managed to successfully fight witches alone, like Roberta the Birdcage Witch, and she even snuck into American military stashes and stole military-grade weaponry to assist in her fights.
How'd she get into America? Oh, American ones overseas. in Japan?
Yes, because Japan doesn't have a standing military. They just use ours.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. When Walpurgisnacht eventually appeared, Homura paused time to set up every bomb, missile launcher, gun, and grenade that she had to fight her, and it wasn't enough. However, while she was distracted, Kyubey lured Madoka towards the fight and coaxed her into making a contract.
Kyubey made an offer, and she wished to have the power to defeat Walpurgisnacht. She became a magical girl just as before. However, every time that Homura had traveled backwards in time, her desire to protect Madoka had bestowed extra magical potential within her, and Kyubey could detect this magical potential, which was why he had grown more insistent upon contracting with Madoka in each successive timeline. Remember, he was stalking her in this one? Mm-hmm. He didn't do that the first time around.
Yeah.
When Madoka made this grander wish, she became the most powerful magical girl of all. Her aesthetic was still based around love, but her magical bows and arrows were far more powerful.
Madoka killed Walpurgisnacht with a single shot, but afterwards, she immediately fell into despair after having completed her only wish and having been tricked by Kyubey. Not knowing how to handle it, Madoka immediately corrupted and transformed into Kriemhild Gretchen, the Witch of Misfortune, the most powerful witch to have ever existed, even more powerful than Walpurgisnacht.
Kyubey notified Homura that Kriemhild Gretchen would likely destroy Earth within 10 days. Homura was furious, but Kyubey mentioned the loss of Earth was of no serious concern. Kyubey explained that the energy they extracted from Madoka would be enough to power the alien civilization for a very long time, finally tossing aside the pretense that they ever cared about the heat death of the universe. They had extracted everything from Earth, and they could find another extraction method at a later time.
Homura refused to accept this, and she went back in time to try again.
I really love this moment, though, because Kyubey tries to offer these pontificated arguments about why capitalism is great, why the system is great, why the magical girl extraction is ultimately good for the universe, and without it, thermodynamics and crap. Mm-hmm. Kyubey does not give a crap about any of that, as we see in this timeline where they just abandon Earth altogether.
Yeah, because it's literally, at the end, it's literally just Homura standing next to the Kyubey that's local to them, watching the witch Madoka destroy the Earth.
Right. This to me really just reminds me of those billionaires. They're like, oh yeah, capitalism is the best thing for the planet. It has some problems, but it's ultimately going to dig us out of this hole. Meanwhile, they're buying bunkers.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right, so we're going to have to cut it off soon, but we got a little more time. So we're going to talk about 2 bonus timelines that come from spin-off manga.
Yeah.
So first we have Oriko's timeline.
Homura went back in time to when she had recovered from her heart disease. She didn't know what to do to ensure that Madoka survived Walpurgisnacht, but she knew that she couldn't let her become a magical girl. She became resigned to the fact that she might have to redo the timeline over and over again, and she was determined to do it just that if it meant that Madoka would survive.
Homura sought to prevent Madoka from becoming a magical girl again, but she decided to take a hands-off approach. She visited Kamiyama City to see if any magical girls there could be of use, but her interference inadvertently led to a magical girl there named Oriko Mikuni to use her power of foresight to predict the fate of Mitakihara City. She saw Kriemhild Gretchen, the Witch of Misfortune, devouring the city and then the entire world.
Oriko sought out Madoka to kill her to prevent her from ever corrupting into a witch, and though she was successful, preventing her vision from coming to pass, Homura killed her in return. Homura then resigned herself to going back in time to try again.
Yep. And that's the beginning and end of that spin-off manga.
Mm-hmm.
Oriko's power is that she can predict the future. She has visions and whatnot.
And she predicted that this timeline would be one of the ones where Madoka corrupted.
Right. Now, it's implied, it doesn't really explain it, but it's implied that Oriko only is a thing in this timeline as well as the next one, because Homura must have interacted with them in some way to, like, bring this about. And other timelines, I guess we presume that Oriko just never thought to have a vision about Mitakihara City. Mm-hmm. And that's why Oriko never realizes that.
Yep.
Extra story timeline. Homura went back in time to when she had recovered from her heart disease.
Homura sought to prevent Madoka from becoming a magical girl again, but she decided to take a more hardline approach with making sure that Madoka did not become a magical girl. Afterwards, she visited Kamihama City to see if any magical girls there could be of use, but her interference inadvertently led to a magical girl there named Oriko Mikuni to use her power of foresight to predict the fate of Mitakihara City. Since Madoka would never become a witch this time, she saw a lesser threat, Valpurgisnacht, devouring the city.
Oriko teamed up with another magical girl, Kiroko Kure, as they prepared to fight the powerful witch. When Valpurgisnacht appeared, they tried valiantly but failed to stop her. Madoka was killed in battle, and Homura resigned herself to going back in time to try again.
So Valpurgisnacht was basically collaterally killed Madoka during this, yeah.
Just somehow.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's weird. It's like, so the first manga about Oriko was just kind of like, ooh, she's going after Madoka, the good girl, because she knows in this timeline she becomes a witch, but she doesn't realize this is just one of many timelines, different interpretations of the same situation, or lack of information about the full picture, conflict, yay, drama.
Yeah.
But I think they were kind of like, wait, we've kind of made our main character of the spin-off manga, Oriko, the bad guy? So they make this alternate timeline as like a bonus extra story where actually she helps Homura try to beat Valpurgisnacht this time.
Yeah.
And just fails.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to have to call it quits there because we're almost out of time. But it's going to get really interesting because we got a few more spin-off manga to do, but we're going to get to the main show and the actual plot of the show. Mm-hmm. Where we get to see what is the eventual fate of capitalism. Right now, we're basically seeing Homura, one girl, trying to fight the system by redoing it until she does it just right. And it's not working out for her.
Mm-hmm. We'll see.
It's almost like she's designed and set up to fail.
Mm-hmm. But she's determined. That's one thing the show definitely continues.
But she's determined because of love.
Yeah. She wants to save Madoka at the cost of anything and everything because she loves Madoka, because Madoka is the most gracious, kind girl she has ever met.
The most rebellious thing you can do in our society is love. It might sound corny, but it's true.
Mm-hmm. And love without limits, without conditions.
Yes, because whatever your type of love is, someone might tell you, hey, don't do that. And as long as you're not hurting anyone, don't let them stop you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I guess we're done for now. We'll pick it up next time. Bye.
Yep, bye.